Hello, Internet. Gino, that Pinguino Greco here again with another episode of Deep Listens, and I am joined, as always, by Billy Bombat Rothert.
You know, I have a lot of affection for the Bombats. You know, they serve me very well when I use them in Stranger's Wrath. That's where they're from, right? Bombats are from Stranger's Wrath?
There are Boombats, but Bombats are from Kaladesh, the Magic the Gathering set, and Magic the Gathering is what we're going to be talking about today.
Oh, man, I was very... I was a little bit off. I was like, man, what a throwback nickname.
Bombat Bazaar Barge.
Sure.
That triple B. And we are also joined to discuss Kaladesh and Magic the Gathering in general by Devin the Duelist DiFrancesco.
I will accept that nickname. It also has a nice little, Devin the Duelist. I like the double D because my, name is already Devin DiFrancesco. So I now I'm just triple D, I guess, not double D. So that works.
Outstanding stuff. So, if you're listening to this podcast, you know that we usually talk about video games, but due to personal stuff, I was not able to, I can't play anything for a while, and have not been able to play anything for a while. But what I have been able to do is play the shit out of some Magic the Gathering and some Kaladesh. And thankfully, I thought this would be a nice way to cross over into a different type of game that I think is very influential, at least on my way of thinking about how game design works and how games should be made. And also that's very influential on a lot of other young developers and modern game design, both in good and bad ways. So, just so you know, we're not going to do a podcast every Magic set unless you want to hear more, listeners. So, if you like or do not like this, please go ahead, shoot us an email at deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com, or leave a comment on our deeplistens.libsyn.com, or tweet us at deeplistenspod. Any of those, if you let us know, hey, this is terrible, don't ever do this again, or hey, please, more Magic the Gathering content,
Gino will happily oblige.
Yes. The only thing that stops me from making more content is a sense of responsibility for your listenership. So, thank you. Without further ado, Magic the Gathering. I assume that most people who are listening might have some cursory familiarity with it because it's big enough in the culture that it's kind of hard to 100% avoid Magic if you like video games, but you may not be super familiar with the game. So, Billy, why don't you explain just a basic thing? We don't describe turn structure.
No. Look at the very, very basics of Magic the Gathering. Okay, first, it is a trading card game. Okay, so people will open.
It is the first trading
card game. So this is built around a collection of cards that do fun stuff. 2 or more players will create a deck and compete against one another, the object of which is to reduce your opponent's life total from the starting amount 20 to 0. You can do that in a variety of ways, all of which involve these different card types. In general, there are, I would say, 3 card types. There's really more, but they fall into these categories. Okay? There's creatures that do stuff that have a physical power and toughness, like summon a monster or a human or a robot or whatever. There is land cards, which act as the currency of the game. You will spend mana that you draw from those land cards to play the other cards in your hand. Besides land and creature cards, there's a whole other category just of spells. They could be like a fireball, or maybe an enchantment, or maybe there'll be some other cool effect. But that's kind of a very, very super basic split. Now, in those creature type cards, maybe there's artifact creatures, or there's multi-typed creatures, and in spells there's instants and sorceries and enchantments and all this other shit. But basically, yeah.
There's also very important thing about Magic is there are 5 colors in the game. Yeah. Each color kind of has its own both mechanical and philosophical definition. in which it lies. There's white, which is the color of law and cooperation. It's kind of a communist color. It tends to... It's all greater good stuff. It's all
white specifically is community over the self, which if you know anything about communism, that's basically communism right there.
Ugh.
Yes. And it has its mechanical definition is largely that it plays a lot of small creatures. It has the most creatures of any color, and it has a bunch of... It has some other controlling elements because it likes law and order. There's blue, which is the color of knowledge and intellect. It tends to draw a lot of cards. It tends to kind of manipulate the game state in some weird ways, like returning things to people's hands or countering spells before they even come into play. It tends to be the most defensive of all of the colors. Then there is black, which is the color of selfishness and death.
Or ambition, depends on,
Or ambition. But it is the most narcissistic of all colors.
Oh yeah, baby.
Black is the self over the community.
That is true.
So black is a very capitalist color.
Or, yes. It has, its creatures have, it's got a weird mix where its creatures are kind of medium-sized. It can do basically anything for a high enough cost, which makes black's definition of the color pie the hardest to describe, because theoretically it can do anything as long as it pays a high enough cost. But the things that it is extra good at is killing creatures, and it's very terrible at killing anything that isn't a creature. And it also has
black
discard.
Specifically can almost never destroy enchantment. Black basically cannot interact with enchantments.
And it can almost not interact with artifacts either.
It's very, very, it's very bad at hurting artifacts.
Then we have red, which is the color of passion and aggression and love. Basically, any sort of emotion, it has the most of it. And it is the most aggressive color. It has creatures that are very slanted towards power instead of toughness. It has burn spells that just do direct damage. And for a lot of years, that was basically all it did. Now it can do some other stuff with like generating temporary mana boosts and drawing temporary cards. But for a while, it was just about playing cheap things and beating people to death. Which, red's kind of the color that is the best at winning.
Best at going fast.
Yeah. Other decks do some fun, crazy, weird stuff. Red just kind of, when you made a real red deck, it was like, what does your deck do that's cool and interesting? Win. It wins the game.
I mean, a like prototypical red deck name is Red Deck Wins. So
yes, it gets the opponent from 20 to 0 as fast as possible. And then green, it is the color of natural life and natural order and history and
history. I think history is blue.
History.
Or I guess it's blue green. I guess I can see the argument for green for history.
Yeah, I think like maybe history goes with green, but like ancient lore and legacy probably goes with blue.
Yeah, green is the most conservative color in terms of I want things to remain the natural way, the way it should be. Don't screw with it. And so it has a reverence for the past, but also big rhinos and stuff like that.
Rhinos are all about upkeeping the past.
Yes, and green just has the biggest creatures, and it beats people to death with them. So that's
what I'd specifically say is green has most like straightforward of big creatures. Like other colors can have big creatures but they have to like fit that color's archetype. Like you could have a white creature that adds a lot of stats to the board, but it like pumps all your other creatures.
Or it has to be an angel.
Pumps itself.
Or it has to be an angel, whereas green creatures are just like, here's a big stupid worm, or here's a big stupid hydra. And that's kind of green's thing. It's gotten more things recently, but I don't want to... I'm assuming some people who are listening actually know this stuff, so that's just a basic primer. These different colors balance out the way the game is played, because you can't play... You have to have lands that produce the colors of mana to play cards of that color, so... If you have a deck with all blue lands, you can't play red cards, which means that there's this constant tension between having the resources to play your cards and also having the effects you want in your deck. And so it creates a system where decks are necessarily constricted in terms of strategy just by the virtue of the fact that your decks are supposed to be 60 card, like at minimum 60 cards, and then also you want it to be consistent because the game, if you get to 0 life, you lose. So you can't really screw around with a deck that isn't consistent.
Yeah,
So.
Decks should just be 60 cards. If you're not playing 60 cards, you're obviously, inept.
You get out of here. Get out of here with your strict 60 card. But without further ado, why don't we get to talking about Kaladesh specifically?
Yeah, why are we talking about this? Like, why have we done this in the past? What made this Kaladesh in particular such a cool thing to talk about?
So the reason for me that I wanted to talk about Kaladesh is I think it is the best set that's been made in maybe 10 years. It's up there. It's very close.
I would definitely say probably top 3 for sure. Like, easily top 3 in the last 10 years, and I have only been playing for 5 years maybe.
So I know about the 5 when I wasn't there.
I don't.
I would definitely say both Innistrads to me are really high contenders and all the concepts. So I don't know if I could put it in my top 3 just because I love cons and Innistrad so much. But it definitely looks like it's going to be one of the best sets for sure.
Yeah, for me my favorite set is Time Spiral. Not close. Then after Time Spiral, it's maybe Original Mirrodin. And
what? Original Mirrodin? You're insane.
Original Mirrodin so I'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about Kaladesh.
The concept of Original Mirrodin is definitely one of the coolest concepts. I'll give you that.
Well, I'll describe it a little bit more when we talk about the specifics of Kaladesh. But I like cons a whole lot. I liked Original Ravnica a whole lot. But I think that there's a lot more going on in Kaladesh that I think is really interesting from a game design perspective in the way that they've gone with Magic set design. And it's led me to think that Kaladesh is pretty great from a lot of different angles. It's cool. So that's why Kaladesh is why we're talking about this, why we're doing a Magic podcast and not, Shadows over Innistrad or Battle for Zendikar.
Oh, God.
It's fine.
So just for the record, in my own defense, I started playing in Return to Ravnica, but some of my knowledge and mechanic history, I will only say, goes as far back as maybe first Zendikar, maybe Alara stuff.
Yeah, and maybe we should give the listeners an idea of how long we've been playing this game, so they have an idea of how experienced and how knowledgeable we may or may not be.
Sure.
So, Billy, you started in Return to Ravnica. Yeah,
I started in Return to Ravnica, which was 2012. And I guess I was right there at the end of the Innistrad block, which was right before then. And that came out in 2011. So that was my first actual play exposure to Magic. And then I got really into it for a couple years, and I looked at a lot of the cards and made a lot of decks, and some of the things that I looked into went as far back as, like I said, probably the Alara block is as far back as I went, which was a 2008 block.
Okay, Devin.
So it's kind of hard to explain. When I started, my parents owned a card store, so I had very early initial exposure to Magic, but as a young kid, I was more into the Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh card games. So I think I really can't say because I really don't know when my card store was my parents' card store was active. So I don't really know when I truly started. But when I really actually started playing was at the very end of Original Innistrad and Avacyn Restored, and I really got into the game and Return to Ravnica. And Gino and I would compete pretty hard in our local college metagame for who would win the drafts. So.
Yes. And then I've been playing Magic since Judgment, to some extent. So that's back in 2002. So I've been playing for about 14 years now. I really started making semi-competitive decks in Mirrodin block, which was a bad time to try and make semi-competitive decks.
Yes, it was.
It was a real dark time for a child to try and make a competitive deck. But I had one competitive deck, and it was fun. And I've never been like the most hardcore of player, but I do okay. Like I'm a pretty good drafter, and I can compete with most people. I'm not gonna confuse anyone for a Pro Tour player or anything, but I've played this game a lot and I've studied it a lot. So I took a break kind of between Lorwyn, Shadowmoor, and then came back in Return to Ravnica, and kind of end of Scars block. So I missed a couple of years, but otherwise played basically every set between Judgment and Kaladesh, which is kind of crazy, but super fun. So with that in mind, let's go into some of the mechanics of Kaladesh. Kaladesh is a set kind of inspired by Indian culture, and by that I mean Indian, not Native American. I think it's a pretty awesome set just from an aesthetic perspective. It's nice seeing pink and purple after Shadows.
Yeah, it's really cool to see a set where it looks like, if you live there, you wouldn't, like be going insane or turning into a monster, something horrible and horrific will be happening to you. Kind of just like a cool place you could just live in, as long as you don't break the consulate's laws.
Yeah.
There's lots of like critters, and there's tons of what seems to be like artwork and intricate aesthetic design. Lots of, I guess, in the world of Kaladesh, there's no like imminent threat right now, like some giant spaghetti monster or werewolves or vampires or
specifically no Eldrazi werewolves.
Oh God. So there's no imminent threat, so like life and culture is thriving, and I think that's something that's emanating from the set's mechanics. It's a very thriving place right now, and some of the mechanics make that seem like it's showing up not only in the story but in how the game is being played right now.
Specifically, the rats, grubs, rhinos, ibexes, and turtles are thriving.
They're thriving.
Those cards were not what I was thinking of specifically.
They're going to the gym.
But some of their mechanics make me think so.
Yeah, and
what I'm referring to when I make that joke is there's a cycle of a card for each of the 5 colors that we went over earlier that is like a thriving X. So that's what I was
thriving rhino, thriving grubs, thriving rats, thriving turtle, thriving ibex.
Thank goodness you explained that. Because now it's either not funny because you explained it, or it went over people's heads anyway.
I mean, when you're making jokes about Magic, you just gotta have to accept what's happening.
That's fair. And I think it's worth one thing that you mentioned, Billy, like the idea that this is a thriving culture that is basically unthreatened. Like there's clearly some tensions going on. But since this might be one of the first sets in a good long while where there isn't a war.
Like a war going on, yeah.
I mean,
framed as the central...
I don't know if that's a good idea, because we pretty much already know that the next set is literally a war. But,
yes, I know.
Right now it's doing pretty great.
And that's the thing, with Magic sets, there's almost always the first set is this setup, this contextualization of where you are. And then the second set and third set are a war. So, like... Welcome to Theros. Everything is okay. It's like Greek mythology world. And then second set, it's a war. Welcome to Scars of Mirrodin. You're in a set where there's like, oh, it's like Mirrodin, but there's something's a little wonky. And then second set, war. Welcome to Alara. It's all these different shards. There are all these different planes that are existing in the same set. And then second set, war. So it happens all the time. And so I know that that's going to be the turn. I've played enough Magic sets. But it's nice to see that the first world, even though they're just going to crap it up in the second set and beat everyone up a little bit, I'm glad that it's like not this giant scale. There are not the implications that there is a giant scale cataclysmic event about to happen. After a handful of sets with like apocalyptic implications, I'll take a regular-ass conflict between two sides.
Yeah, I mean, compared to, like, multiverse-scale threats to literally everything, Kaladesh looks pretty okay.
Yeah, and there's none of the big Magic antagonists are involved, so...
Tezzeret.
Yeah, but not in the same way. It's fine.
Tezzeret is Bolus.
It's fine. So,
It's just some oil. I'm sure it's fine. It's nothing.
It's fine. The mechanics of Kaladesh, I think, speak to that thriving nature. There are 3 new central mechanics: energy, vehicles, and fabricate. So let's start with fabricate because it's the easiest. It is the closest to regular magic.
Yeah, for sure.
There's a bunch of cards that have fabricate and then a number. When a fabricate card comes into play, you choose whether to create X 1/1 servos, which are artifact creatures, or put X +1/+1 counters on the creature that is coming into play with fabricate. And then the fabricate number determines what size that X is. So if a card has fabricate 1, you either can make 1 servo or put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. And it tends to lead to some interesting choices where, do you want to go tall or do you want to go wide? What are you trying to do?
One thing that I want to hit on is if you know much about more competitive Magic, the default mode, if you just heard about this mechanic, the default mode in a competitive perspective is to make servos. Just in general, it's generally better to make 2 threats rather than 1. That's not always the case, but the default, 60% versus 40% would be make the servos. But they've really done a really good job of giving the base creature some kind of keyword like trample or haste or flying or something like that. And if you don't give the creature the +1/+1 counter, basically you're like, do you want a bigger flyer or do you want to make 2 cool threats? So I feel like they've done a really good job of balancing the 2 options.
A really good example of that exact choice, Devin, is I think in a card called Propeller Pioneer. It's a 4-mana creature that has 2 power and 1 toughness, and it has flying, and it has fabricate 1. So it can either become a little bit of a bigger creature in the air or make a buddy on the ground. And in a more defensive deck, I think that making a big making two blockers, if you're maybe someone's trying to race you down against the clock, or throw lots of aggression at you, having 2 blockers could be really important. But if maybe the clock is racing in the other direction, you need to get 3 damage over their head faster. That's a really good example of a time where that decision makes a lot of difference versus defensive versus offensive.
Yes, and one of the interesting other decisions you see with Kaladesh, with Fabricate specifically, is that depending on which color pairs you are going with, the +1/+1 counters versus the servos becomes a lot more significant. So Fabricate is mostly found in white, green, and black, though it has some presence in the other 2 colors. However, in white and black, you generally want servos because there are a bunch of cards that either care about artifacts being in play or pump your entire team's power and toughness. However, in green, there are a bunch of cards that reward +1/+1 counters, which all of a sudden skews your decision-making towards +1/+1 counters. If you go with white-green, all of a sudden you probably want... Ordinarily, the choice might be to just make servos, but all of a sudden you might want counters because you have more green counters sort of matter cards. Or if you have more white go wide cards, all of a sudden those green cards that just looked really appealing when they were bigger, maybe you want to go wide all of a sudden. Then if you pair like white or black with red, there's a bunch of cards that care about when artifacts enter the battlefield or how many artifacts you have, and all of a sudden the create servos option becomes a lot more significant because of the enters the battlefield triggers. And so the way that these abilities interact, Fabricate, when you first look at it, if you don't look at the whole set, it looks like a kind of boring mechanic, because it reads like, a 1/1 or a +1/+1 counter. That's not that big of a choice, but because of the different mechanics that they've built into the set that care about those each of those 2 choices in different ways, it makes for some pretty dynamic gameplay.
It turns on lots of stuff.
Yeah, and
it lets lots of stuff activate.
I noticed it because I actually played 2 pre-releases. One deck I played white-blue, and one I played white-red. And with white-blue, just the the option of having like that flyer and then also being able to clog up the ground with servos was super important. But all of a sudden, when I added red, the enters the battlefields started mattering a whole lot more, and I thought it was really cool. Blue is the only color that doesn't have like an obvious.
Yeah,
Hey,
synergy with Fabricate.
This is the one you definitely want.
But blue has both an enter the battlefield synergy and an artifact matter synergy. So I would actually say that
Servos.
blue is definitely in the servo direction.
Yeah. Green is the only color where I think it's definitely the
Yeah.
+1/+1 counters are generally more important. Though black has it a little bit as well.
No, black has a lot of artifact synergy too. So
It has both. I just think that
Yeah.
some of the black Fabricate cards just by themselves are better when they're bigger. Like
Got
they
it.
have their stats become a lot more important when they get a little bit bigger sometimes.
yeah, I think one has like menace or something like that, and you might
Yeah.
want a higher power on your menace.
Yeah, one of them is a 3/1 menace if you control an artifact, I think.
No, it's a menace if it's Fabricate. And
Oh, it's Fabricate Menace?
Those cards both
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
another one that says Menace if you control an artifact.
Yeah. So there's a little bit more tension with black. And black-green also has an uncommon that deals -2/-2 to everything without a +1/+1 counter.
Yep.
So I think that is the signal that, hey, you should put the counters on the dudes when you're in this color combination. But I didn't see within black itself. Oh, there's the flyer, the 2/2 flyer that steals +1/+1 counters.
Oh yeah, that's right. You're definitely correct about that.
So there's a little bit in the Aetherborns that care about that stuff. But I love how Fabricate plays in a way that I didn't think I would. But it is by far the least interesting of the three mechanics, which is it speaks to how well this set was designed that we can go that deep on just the most boring mechanic.
It's really important that Fabricate is so simple because the next two mechanics are just really complicated.
Okay, let's do vehicles next. Devin, why don't you explain vehicles?
So vehicles are a really cool thing that they added to this Magic set. If you've ever played with Magic before, there is a mechanic called Equipment, where you can pay some mana and basically make a creature wield some kind of object. This is a little bit different, and the way this works out, it's almost reverse. The vehicle that you play, it's just a non-creature artifact when you first play it, usually, that has, weirdly enough, a power and toughness. So, for example, there's one that is a 2 mana, you pay 2, and it's a 2/3 flying non-creature permanent. So it just looks kind of weird. It just has no text besides flying 2/3 and not being a creature. But then it has this new mechanic called Crew, and you can tap creatures with some amount of total power. So you can tap one creature that has the amount of power that you want or more, or you can tap 2 or 3, maybe even 4 in some really weird situation where you can tap all these different creatures, and they all hop into your vehicle, and then the vehicle can work. Importantly, if your opponent tries to like kill your vehicle, your creatures don't die in a horrible car crash. Or,
They jump out.
That. Yeah, they jump out in time. There's like evac seats.
Eject button.
Importantly, the creatures do tap, so it's kind of one of those things that you pay some attackers or blockers to make your vehicle an attacker or blocker instead.
And it's also important to mention most vehicles have much greater power and toughness than whatever their crew cost is. So, like that Whirlybird that you mentioned, the 2/3, it has a crew cost of 1, so you need to spend 1 creature's worth of power to, or no, it's just 1 power.
Yep, and in a set where there are servos running all over the place, your servo just hops up into a flying robot, and then it's a 2/3 flyer, which is pretty sweet.
Little robots get into bigger robots.
Yeah.
And now it's Voltron.
Did you have a crew a vehicle yet?
I have not. I
did that.
I'm so excited for that to happen.
I made a servo pilot that 2/3 flying. What is that thing called?
Sky Sif?
Yeah, a Sky Skiff, and then I had a Sky Skiff pilot, a Renegade trolley or whatever it is.
Renegade
Freighter. So I went from 1 damage to 2 damage to 5 damage. And the whole time I'm like, please don't have a single anything. If you kill my little 1/1, all of a sudden my daisy chain is broken. But they didn't. It was okay.
Yeah, I weirdly just by randomness in my pre-release deck, I was running 3 vehicles which is I think is a little much, but it worked out for the vehicles that I had because they had other stuff. Each one of them that I played actually had some kind of enter the battlefield trigger, so they did something besides just be a vehicle. And all of them happened to have crew cost 3. So there was no way to profitably do a weird daisy chain. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing I love about vehicles, other than the fact that they're frickin' vehicles, like that's just cool. Like there are some of them that are just hot rods, and that's awesome. But the fact that all of a sudden, one, you could turn your weak creatures that were not doing anything into relevant bodies instead of just having them kind of sit there and clog up the board. It helps break board stalls because all of a sudden, instead of having two sides that are just staring at each other, there are these vehicles that are big enough to break through. And so you're fighting with cars instead of fighting with just kind of mashing all your dudes together. But also, when your creatures are dead, you can crew regardless. So normally, you can crew regardless of if a creature is summoning sick or not. So you can crew the turn you play a creature, which means that as soon as you have a vehicle on board, if, for some reason all your creatures die, drawing a creature all of a sudden makes you live to do potentially a ton of damage again out of nowhere, which I think is a really interesting mechanical implication. Like, it almost gives your creatures haste. And not just haste, but like +5/+5 in haste. Like, it can be really savage what you're able to do depending on what kind of creature you draw and what vehicles you already had in play. And it makes for an interesting decision when it comes to destroying creatures. Like, all of a sudden, removal takes on different meaning when you can either kill the pilot, or kill the vehicle. And if you kill the vehicle, then yeah, you remove some stats, but they still have something that can block. If you kill the pilot, then, hey, this vehicle's useless, and they can't even defend themselves. But as soon as they draw another pilot of some kind, all of a sudden you're in the same position.
During one of the games that I played at my pre-release, unfortunately for my opponent, she was playing a primarily, vehicle-based deck, and she played a creature that has three power, so it can crew a lot of vehicles. And my initial response was, gosh, and like my curve's kind of bad in this hand, and so I'm gonna play Revoke Privileges on that thing, and we'll just see if I can, draw something better later. But I had to kind of get that 3/1 guy who comes in tapped not to hit me. And then she played like 3 vehicles after that she couldn't crew because that says this creature can't crew vehicles.
You took
and
his
it can't
license
attack
away.
And it can't block. Yeah, like I basically grounded him and took his car keys, and that sort of like turned off her entire deck for like 4 or 5 turns. So the ability to crew or not to crew,
that is the question.
Yeah, that is the question.
One quick point, just for anyone who, after hearing this podcast wants to play some Magic when they haven't played too much before, I would highly advise trying to keep to 2 to 3, and in some rare cases 4 vehicles. But you really want to hit that like 2 to 3 sweet spot because you need like a lot
limited.
of creatures. Yeah. Specifically, this is for limited Magic where you hop in and you open some packs and they become your deck in some way depending on which format you're playing, and you play with a 40 card deck and you want to run generally 2 to 3 vehicles and a bunch of creatures that can crew them.
Yeah, unless you have some very specific vehicle synergies or ways to like get benefit out of them just being on the board. There's a few, but they're pretty narrow.
Yeah, like for example, I had the card Gino was referring to earlier. I had the Bomat Bizarre Barge, which is just a boat. It's just a great boat, and when you play it, it draws you a card. So if you are kind of in a bad spot where you don't have a creature crew your vehicles yet, you can play that boat, and it swings down the river and picks you up a new card, and maybe that card will be a creature that can get in your boat.
Exactly, and so it's not a dead card ever, which is nice because so many of the vehicles are. But vehicles, I think, add some interesting dimensions. They are kind of like super equipment. I like them a lot more than equipment, but I think that it's just I expect to see them going forward in limited quantities.
I would really like to see. I think it's kind of unlikely. I don't know how they can make the flavor work, but considering how Wizards have been treating equipment recently, I would actually really like to see them trying to either make equipment more vehicle-ish in some way, or just straight up, make vehicles a permanent feature of Magic. I don't know how that would actually work, but
I would think that there are some equipments that could have been vehicles, and I bet going forward they're just vehicles. Yeah. And then they keep the equipment doing the good equipment stuff, and then they offload some of that to vehicles. But I think it's too good of an idea to just stay in Kaladesh, especially because it's so plane agnostic.
Can we think of any really, really cool ideas that did kind of just get restricted to one block? I mean, you guys probably know better than me. Are there any cool mechanics that kind of got locked away in one set?
Plane specifically?
Yeah. I wish there was more ninjutsu.
I will say, until recently, I think Morph was a really cool idea. I think it came back in Time Swirl too.
It did.
But Morph was something that I could actually see. It's a very complicated mechanic, but it honestly, I'm a primarily limited player, and in a limited deck, it's so much easier to play a 6-mana card that's a 3-mana 2/2. I'm probably getting too complex for the point of this.
It's fine. We might actually just edit out the part where we're not talking in the weeds, because it's almost impossible to make sense of any of this if you're not already, like, we're saying tap, and what the fuck does that mean if you're not in Magic?
I'm trying to think. Can you think of anything else, Gino, that there's just like a really cool mechanic that has only been in one standard? And honestly, that might be something to look at, of like a mechanic that could come back.
Yeah, and that's the critical thing. Like, Magic, the designers try not to just kind of use something once and then never bring it back if it has depth. So a lot of the times the mechanics that I say, oh, it's a shame that was just in one set, it's usually because it was only had enough designs. Either it was frickin' broken and can't be reprinted, or it had enough design space for like one set's worth of cards and not more.
Like, I wouldn't say that anything from Return to Ravnica should like come back a bunch, because those were kind of really like one-dimensional mechanics. I think.
Evolve.
That might be my only exception. And kind of Extort kind of came back, but not really. But I'm thinking of stuff like Unleash is not very depth-worthy. Detain's kind of boring. It's kind of cool tempo-y, but whatever. Populate was that's kind of really, really one-dimensional. What else was some like Blood Rush was kind of weird.
But really don't want Cypher to ever come back.
Yeah, Cypher had a lot of...
treat it the way they treated it last time.
They can't even bring it back. I don't think there are enough cards to put that on.
I think they wish it could be good, but they're probably so afraid of it being just massively busted that they just can't make it fun.
And it's also a mechanic that can only be on instants and sorceries, and if you make it too good, it's just the most dominant thing possible. So it's the most narrow mechanic of all of them. So I would say of a mechanic that has only been in one world that I would like to see come back, I like Splice onto Arcane. I like Arcane as an idea, even though I know it's the most parasitic of all mechanics. I think
we could do Splice like onto Instant, or Splice onto Sorcery. And it might be too broken, but I feel like it'd be too hard for it to be. I feel like Arcane's bad.
Yes, Arcane is bad, but I like Splice, and I like
cool.
What is another good?
Ninjutsu's
a good one.
Ninjutsu. It's weird. Kamigawa had so many problems, but a lot of its mechanics are actually really cool if you just make them like a little bit less dumb.
Didn't they also have like level up mechanics? You could pay mana to like make a guy get bigger.
So complex.
Level up is from Zendikar, or is it Rise of the Eldrazi? It's from one of the Zendikar ones.
It's from the original Zendikar. I think it was in all 3 Zendikar sets, actually.
Kamigawa had upside down cards.
Yeah.
No, please. Flip cards are a mechanic that I really want to see be somewhere beside. I guess obviously we had the flip planeswalkers, but I really like to see flip cards on another plane besides Innistrad that is not like a 5-card cycle. I'd like to see just another flip card block, because flip cards are really cool.
Yes, and the big problem with Kamigawa is all those cool mechanics are locked there because they are all Japanese themed. They are named after Japanese things, so you're just kind of screwed.
That's something Wizards has been so much better about recently, of trying to make sure that their cards and ideas and concepts are not plane locked.
Yep. So
Locked,
speaking,
basically saying like set locked, as in like it can go to another world.
yeah, speaking of a mechanic that I hope to see again, but probably will be locked to Kaladesh, is energy. So energy is, I think, one
is
of the
weird.
coolest. It's one of the coolest mechanics they've come up with in a very long time because I love resources. I love having resources that aren't mana. I like when they make more resources. And energy is a new resource. Billy, why don't you explain what the hell energy is?
Okay. Um, I guess to finish up Gino's thought about himself, Gino likes to spend any cost that's not like a regular normal cost. If
I just
it's
wanna
pay his life total to do something, pay his cards in his hand to do something, pay cards in his deck to do something, pay like the snack that he brought from for lunch that day, to do something. If he's like down to pay some weird cost to do anything cool in Magic, fine. But no mana, he's not interested. So now Gino gets this new cool thing to spend, and it's called energy. So there's really no good way to talk about this without saying what's actually happening here. So some cards, when they come into the battlefield or when some of ability triggers, generates a new form of currency called energy. Energy exists in the form of counters, and you can have I guess as many as is allowed by the current board state, and you can spend those energy to activate other effects or pay other costs. What's unique about energy is that it doesn't really exist on the board state per se. It kind of exists next to the player. There's the battlefield where your creatures and your vehicles are, and then there's your deck and your graveyard, and there's cards in your hand. And energy are kind of in some other spot. In other realms of Magic, it's kind of called the command zone, but that's kind of getting too specific. Just imagine it being not on the playing field, kind of next to you, in your chair. You have a little stack of energy to spend as as well as other things.
Yeah, creatures do not have energy. Lands do not have energy. You, the player, have X amount of energy.
Yeah, it's like sitting in your lap when you're playing.
Yes. And so the ramification of that is if, you played a card that gave you 3 energy and someone kills it, you still have 3 energy. A lot of earlier cards had, for example, in Mirrodin, there's something called charge counters, and that did a very similar idea. This machine has 3 uses, and when its uses are done, it's useless. It has no power left. But if they destroyed that card, it doesn't matter how much power it had when it died. It's dead. Energy tries to make that resource, and it makes it universal. And it means that you can play cards that generate energy and can't use energy. Or you can play cards that can use energy but can't make it. Though I don't think they did that. Every card that uses energy has some way to create it. Even
Not
if it's not
everyone, but definitely for the most part, the cards do. There are a very small number of cards that do make energy without having a way to use them.
I thought... No, I mean, there are sources without sink... So, there are sources and sinks of energy. Almost every single card in this set is a source and a sink. If it is involved with energy at all.
So,
but none of them are
Imperial
just
Voyager
yes,
is a source only.
There are sources that are just sources, but I don't think there are any sinks that are just sinks. You're right. Sorry if I misunderstood that.
No problem. What were you saying, Billy?
There is a card that is a source only. Imperial Voyager says whenever you deal combat damage, you get that many energy based on that creature's combat damage. So he has 2 power, and so if he hits a player or deals combat damage, you get 2 energy, but he has no way to spend energy. So that's one example of a source with no sink.
Yeah, and there are a couple of puzzle knots, and there's a 2/1 creature in green that makes 3 energy. So there's some cards that just make energy, but most of them make it and then use it. And so this mechanic, it's in all 5 colors, and there's a lot of artifacts, too, that interact with energy. But the cool thing is you can build decks that kind of pass this energy around between your permanents in ways that are super advantageous. And it asks you a lot of cool questions about how to use energy and when it's useful. Because like I said, since a lot of the sources are also sinks, you kind of have to decide which of these minor effects. Generally, these cards have very minor effects. But you have to decide which ones you want. because you can't pay for all of them. Usually, each energy producer will like produce enough energy to use its ability once, twice, maybe 3 times, but after that they're shot, and they have no more energy or ability to use their powers if they're in isolation, which means that all of a sudden, like, you can have cards where I've got this dude who lets me scry, who lets me look at the top card of my deck and decide whether I want it to go to the bottom of my deck, and then I have this dude who taps or untaps creatures. I can either scry 5 times or untap something or tap something twice, or some mixture of those two. Which one do I want to do? And it lets you build decks where you're just like hoarding energy, or it lets you build decks where every card is basically using the energy it produces and nothing else, or somewhere in between, and kind of a balance and a blend. And it just makes for a lot of very cool deck design and difficult questions.
I had a really cool. Yeah, I'm gonna go real quick just because I had an energy specific. I had the guy Gino was talking about, the guy that can scry. His name is Aether Theorist. I think it's a guy. I'm not entirely sure. Aether Theorist who can scry and make some energy, and then I had Thriving Rhino who can make some energy. And in one game, I think I had a mulligan, and I was kind of land light. So Aether Theorist just kind of brought my game home and made sure that I actually drew my lands on time by scrying. And then in the very next game, it gave my Thriving Rhino another counter. So my Thriving Rhino ended up being a 3-mana 4/5, which is way above the curve. So I just really like that my Aether Theorist was in one game able to, like scry like it's supposed to. In another game, it helped me have an undercrossed threat. So I really like that. Usually a blue card, wouldn't really help you have an undercrossed threat or anything like that. Was able to cooperate with a green card, just do some really cool stuff.
When you play that Thriving Rhino, can you pay its 2 energy costs twice in the same turn, or can you only do it?
No, each attack step.
Yeah. So, it's not like fire breathing or something.
No.
I actually had a situation where my opponent had stumbled on mana, but I had no good way to punish them, except for my Thriving Turtle, which is a 0/3. And so every turn, you can pay 2 energy to give it a +1/+1 counter. So I attacked with my turtle, made it a 1/4, played that Aether Theorist, attacked again, made it a 2/5, and then I think I played another energy creature on turn 3, or an energy land or something, and I made it a 3/6 turtle, and all of a sudden, my stupid turtle was the most threatening thing, and went from a 20 turn to kill my opponent, to 10 turns to kill my opponent, to 7 turns to kill my opponent, and that was just enough pressure to kill them.
After you've done your first, second, and third round, you've done 6 damage, and so now they're at 14, and you have a 3/6 on the board, and now it's like a 5-turn clock, maybe?
And that turtle, without energy working the way it does, my turtle would not have done much of anything.
That turtle was just thriving.
It was.
Thanks to Kaladesh.
Turn 1, it started eating right. Turn 2, it started working out. Turn 3, it got an apartment and moved out of its parents' house.
And self-respect,
And self-respect. And then, you know what? My opponent respected it as well.
So we talked a little bit about what Gino's deck design was when he did his pre-releases, but did we actually cover Devin or Eyes?
No, not really.
So I guess I'll go then. This was my first pre-release in a long time. The last pre-release that I went to actually was, I think, Theros. And
just a quick caveat, let's try to make these anecdotes pretty quick, because there is nothing more boring than listening to someone else describe their pre-release or limited situations.
Yeah, I guess, but Devin and I did really different things, I think, and that's kind of indicative of what this set had to offer. In fact, all 3 of us did really different deck stuff. So, yeah, I'm not going to describe the whole strategy, but essentially I played in white and black, and I had tons of Fabricate, and I had tons of cards that did cool stuff if I had artifacts on the board. I did not have a lot of vehicles, so I was kind of sad about that. And I had pretty decent removal spells. I had about 5 ways to kill stuff or make it not a threat. So that's kind of what my deck was rolling with. I had a lot of fun. I think my level of Fabricate made me make a lot of cool choices, and I enjoyed that. Like almost all my creatures were artificers, and I also had those goggles, so that was a lot of fun. The inventor's goggles, which can be equipped for free onto an artificer if it enters the battlefield that turn. So that was just really, really cool. My deck didn't perform excellently. I went 2-2. I think I could have done better, but I had a lot of fun playing this particular pre-release, and I think if I can, I might play some more events.
Yeah, Devin, what'd you go with?
I ended up in green-blue. Now, normally,
Lucky.
green and blue are the energy colors. I did have some very minor energy themes, but my real main theme was just artifacts. Probably my favorite thing, it was kind of very typical of my deck, was to play some crappy artifact that was either like a 2-mana 2/2 or like one of those 2-mana puzzle knots that come into the battlefield and play something, and then use this really fun card called Shrewd Negotiation. And what Shrewd Negotiation does, I get to pick one of my artifacts, and I pick one of your artifacts or creatures and say, I'm just gonna negotiate with you that your bomb rare is now mine, and you can have this 2-mana 2/2. Yeah, it's pretty fair. And that was kind of what my deck was all about. My deck was all about vehicles and swapping artifacts and just kind of taking advantage of artifacts. Some games the energy worked out a little more just because I just had that drawback. I probably only had 3 or 4 energy cards. My main theme was green and blue. Artifacts matter.
Nice. And so I think this set has a pretty great diversity in terms of the different play styles and how the decks can interact with one another. And it also has no clear, at least so far, there's no obvious front runner in terms of this is the correct way to play and this is the correct deck to play.
I would agree right now.
Which I think is interesting. Because there are some times where it's just glaringly obvious, like this is what you want to do. And this is the mechanic that matters. Like, here's a mechanic that basically has no relevance in limited, or here's a mechanic that has no relevance in standard. And I think all of the mechanics will hit in just about every... I wouldn't say necessarily in modern or legacy, but hit in standard and hit in limited, which is what these sets are designed to do.
If I had to give like a slight edge, it's hard to say, but I think probably vehicles, even though they're really, really cool, probably are going to have the least competitive edge. Because
I disagree.
All right, well, let's maybe make an argument for this, because I'm going to say, well, let me state my case first, and then you can counter me. So, I think that if you have things like Fabricate and Energy, both let you make a lot of different choices based on the current board situation. I mean, vehicles do make a little bit of a choice, like what creature goes into crew or something, but I think if you have really cool this or that options with Fabricate, and you can use the energy that you have on maybe whatever your energy sinks are on your board, that gives you more versatility and more options, which I think is probably going to be better in this current set of stuff.
So the reason why I think that vehicles are going to be played is because there's this card called Smuggler's Copter, and in standard it's going to be a monster. It's a 2-mana 3/3 flying vehicle that whenever it attacks or blocks lets you draw or discard a card, and that card's a monster. It's got crew 1, so it's just going to eat up. It's going to be played in a lot of formats. It's very good.
I definitely would agree with Gino. I think Smuggler's Copter is almost guaranteed. I'll say pretty much just guaranteed to see standard play, and I think it has a non-zero chance of seeing modern play.
And it has a non-zero chance of seeing legacy play.
I will also say I think Sky Sovereign Console Flagship or whatever has a pretty high chance of seeing standard play. I mean, that card's it is a 5-mana card that comes into battlefield, does 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker. Oh god, we just said planeswalker. Anyways, I think it was the first time. Anyways,
yeah,
and then every time you crew it and it attacks, it also does another 3 damage.
It blows stuff up.
Creature or planeswalker, so it's kind of just like an Inferno Titan. And Inferno Titan is a pretty good card. So I'm gonna say 5-mana Inferno Titan with like some drawbacks. It also flies. I think I can reasonably say that card's gonna probably see some standard play, which will also be really nice for me because I open one and I'd like to sell it off.
Yeah, the problem with Fabricate is mostly that the best card with Fabricate is Angel of Invention, and it happens to cost the same amount of mana as Archangel Avacyn, which is the strongest card in the format, or close to it. So it's kind of hard to be that mana cost in that color and see play. And then a lot of the other Fabricate cards are limited all-stars. Like, limited, they're going to be amazing. But unfortunately, in a world where people are playing just these murderers, I don't know if you can play cards that make 1/1s. But we'll see. I think all three of these will see play in Standard and in Limited. It's just to what extent. And one thing I wanted to definitely talk about was the texture of this Standard. Because I think that Wizards has done, the company that makes Magic, has done a pretty admirable job of creating an environment where multiple different deck types and different card types are going to be relevant. Especially after last Standard, where it was just kind of, I mean, there was a diversity, but unfortunately Collected Company was such a oppressive card that 50% or 60% of the metagame at any given time was just different cocoa.
I actually just want to push back into that real fast. I actually looked it up today. I don't know what it was throughout the entire Standard, but I looked it up today. As of today, cocoa is 40% of the metagame, which is not exactly an indicator of metagame health.
Did you just say cocoa?
Collected
it's
Company, cocoa.
Oh, dear God.
It's cocoa. 50 to 60%, I don't think we've ever seen that much, but definitely 40%, and that's really too much.
It's way too much. You don't want to play, if you don't want to go to a tournament and then you have almost a 50, every other person you play is playing the exact same deck with maybe like 2 or 3 cards different. Like, that's not great. But one of the things that Wizards did, so first, what makes a deck super oppressive? Usually it is because it has either it is a very linear strategy that is overwhelmingly powerful with very limited ways to stop it. For example, Affinity is a good example of that from Mirrodin Standard. It was a deck that was incredibly aggressive and just could kill you on turn 2 and 3 and 4 with semi-regularity, and that was just disgusting. And so there was no good way to interact with that deck. It was just too fast. It was too much faster than anything else that if you were going to play an aggressive deck, you were just going to play Affinity. And every deck that was a little bit slower just got chased out of the format, and it just became a format of Affinity and the deck that can kind of fight Affinity. And those were the two decks that people played. Or like, you know, the category of not Affinity but can kind of deal with Affinity, maybe you have 2 decks, but Affinity is the monster that just runs everything. There's also decks with just oppressively wide answers. Like, for example, in Ravnica, Return to Ravnica, there was Azorius, green, white, blue control was very powerful. I wouldn't say it was as oppressive, but what it had was just like cards that just killed target creature for very cheap, or target creature and every creature with that name, or destroy all creatures for 4 mana uncounterable, and then draw X number of cards and gain X life. And so all of these cards are very powerful and also hit a huge swath of cards.
None of those were the color combinations intended mechanic. Like, that's not the detain stuff. That was just oh wait, we're blue and white, we're going to get all this great shit regardless.
I want to quickly say, I think Gino was trying to make this clear, but I just wanted to fully make this clear. I know Gino already knows this. Affinity is one of the most oppressive standards ever. They had to ban, like, I think something like 10 or more cards out of that standard.
And it was still oppressive.
And it was still too powerful. And on the other hand, White Blue Control and Return to Ravnica, which is like a totally valid deck. It was certainly powerful, but I don't even know if it was the strongest deck from that standard.
No.
Yeah, so I just wanted to briefly put, Azorius is certainly a very strong deck, but it's not oppressive in the way that Affinity was.
No, and when I say oppressive, I don't necessarily mean that it is 100% of the metagame or something like that. I just mean that there are decks that tend to gain the majority of the metagame, and the reasons they do so is like card quality or other strategy, just so strong that other strategies can't keep up, or they have a great ability to answer any given threat. And those are generally what makes a deck great. Like Abzan in the last standard was good. It wasn't super duper oppressive, but it was mostly because, hey, it's got a very powerful thing to do at all of the different mana costs. And if you just play these cards out and the answers are good enough in the deck that you don't need to do something a little bit more fancy. You're just beating them to death with card quality. And what they've done in this standard is they have made a whole lot, in my opinion, they've made a whole lot of decks with they are very contextually powerful, but they all have answers, but those answers are not so powerful as to wipe the deck idea from the face of the earth. So one example of a time when there was a cool idea, but the deck kind of got wiped from the face of the earth due to hate. There was original Dredge, I believe, in Ravnica. You guys were not necessarily around for that. But Dredge is a deck that kind of relies on graveyard interactions. And immediately after printing that, they pretty quickly printed a card called Tormod's Crypt, which was 0 mana, exile target graveyard. It gets rid of their graveyard. So it's a deck that's trying to do all sorts of fun stuff with the graveyard. But for 0 mana, you could just get rid of their graveyard and turn the entire deck off.
I just want to quickly say, I don't think we can really use the word fun and Dredge in the same sentence. I don't know if that's really accurate.
Original Ravnica Dredge was not what Dredge is now. It wasn't
really?
getting...
I wasn't around then, but my only experience with Dredge is people that have no lands on their deck, and they start the game by discarding a card, and then they just don't play any Magic, and then you lost somehow, and you don't understand.
Yeah, so original Dredge, you actually cast the cards.
Whoa! Wow, that's an entirely new thing for me.
Yeah, because in original Ravnica, there were no free cards that you were playing with Dredge, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
But the hate... There's Tormod's Crypt, there's these cards that have very specific... they are laser beams. They destroy whole strategies. Aven Mind Sensor is one. It's a creature that stops... If you were going to search your deck, you can only search the top 4 cards of your deck. So if you had a strategy that that needed you to search your deck, well, you're fucked. Sorry.
I'm pretty sure that card has flash.
It does. It's real fucked. It's a real messed up card.
I would say Aven Mind Sensor, while it is messed up, in the only formats where it's good, in Modern and Legacy, it is just a totally fair, reasonable Magic card because there's so much broken stuff there. But yeah,
yes.
If there was a standard deck that was really all about searching its library, Aven Mind Sensor would be pretty rude to it.
Exactly, and the way that Wizards used to design these sorts of themes was they would print an off switch, basically, in Theros. After Theros block, which was very enchantment focused, they printed in, I think, was it M15?
Well, one of the core sets, yeah.
One of them, they printed a card that just destroyed all enchantments. It was
I think it's
destroy all
yeah. I think it's I'm not sure. It's either Back to Nature or Return to Nature, something like that. And it is literally just green 1 sorcery, destroy all enchantments.
And that's just an off switch. That's if stuff gets too crazy, here's a card that just hates it out of the metagame. And if you want to see a metagame where this deck doesn't exist, just play that. If it gets too good, everyone's going to build a deck that just has this card in it from game 1, and there you go. Problem solved. But they've stopped doing that recently. They've started printing a lot better, a lot more powerful threats, and then narrow answers to them that don't make sense to put in the main deck very often. And I think that leads to a lot more varied games. So, for example, in Kaladesh, because it's an invention-themed world, they printed a lot of artifacts that have very cool, build-around potential. A card that you can make an entire deck just using this one card. Now, if you're going to make a bunch of artifacts like that, and you don't want them to be utterly broken, you need to make them sort of expensive, a little bit expensive, and you need to make it so that the decks that use those cards are kind of skewed toward taking advantage of them. Because if, you can just play a normal deck and then just get this bonkers interaction just as a side effect, it can just become pretty degenerate. So what we ended up with in Kaladesh is we've got all these build-around artifacts, and they've all got payoffs. But they printed a card that's just search an opponent's deck, name a card, search your opponent's deck for that card, and exile them, get rid of them.
I think it's deck, hand, and graveyard.
Yeah, it's everywhere. Get it out. It's called Lost Legacy. It's 3 mana. Just get rid of it. All of our build-around artifacts are 4 mana, which means that if your opponent plays 4 Lost Legacy, you could just get rid of all of them. Except Lost Legacy, you can't name artifacts, which means
it's specifically named a creature, right? Or is it
no, it's
non-artifact?
Non-artifact, non-land.
Oh, cool. Got it.
So because they printed that one non-artifact clause, this entire category of card, this build-around artifact, is now something that can be built around and actually used. If that card had been able to hate them out, like a lot of those artifacts require you to skew your deck in such a strong direction that that one card existing at 3 mana would just annihilate them all. And it has such, because it's just, name a card, it's useful against other decks too. It's very useful against decks with individual powerful creatures that you want to get rid of. Like, for example, there's this card called Emrakul, the Promised End, and it's really strong. It's a 13/13 for 7 mana. It says it's 13 mana, but it's not 13 mana. It's never 13 mana. And there are decks that would just play Lost Legacy just to deal with Emrakul. But if you just, as a fun side effect, also get to completely annihilate all these weird combo decks, then you're just going to end up in a world where those weird combo decks don't exist. And so by making choices like that, I think Wizards has engineered a environment where there are answers to these decks. Like, for example, there's a 1-mana blue counterspell that counters target colorless card.
Colorless card, yeah.
Which a 1-mana answer to any of these combo engines is pretty damn strong, but it also misses so many other cards that you'll almost never play that card in your main deck. It doesn't seem like that's the correct thing to do yet. So I see a format where there are a lot of answers to all of the problems presented, but none of them are so broad that you want to just run them as the default, at least so far. Devin, you've been squinting and making faces.
No, I'm gonna say, I'm gonna push back a little bit and say that I think safety valves, which is what I call the same thing you're talking about when you're saying off switch, are really important to Magic. I actually think that Lost Legacy is specifically a safety valve against Emrakul decks. I think that is actually why they printed it, just in case Emrakul decks are too strong. And I don't think they've really stopped making these cards. I think there's a card in... I think what they do in Major Kaladesh can have fun. But I think it's interesting that they decided not to put a graveyard-specific hate safety valve. I think it should be interesting to see how that turns out. I actually was talking to a friend, and this is just a wild conjecture, that we think that we've already gotten confirmed that the next set coming after this is an Egyptian-themed set, and there might be some cool graveyard stuff in there. So maybe that's why they didn't put Graveyard Hate, because they wanted Egyptian set to have fun with Innistrad set and just have cool graveyard friendship.
Also, if we had a bunch of Graveyard Hate, that would make any kind of Delirium fun stuff just never happen. Yeah. Delirium would just get deleted, basically.
And I think they did put a really good answer to those kind of wacky artifacts that Gino was talking about, the build-around ones, in that they printed a card that for 1 white mana can destroy an artifact from 1 to 4 CMC. I think that's kind of their safety valve in case the wacky artifacts get too strong. But it is true that they aren't a main boardable effect, and actually just in the standard, this card is just leaving now. It was a card called Jermoka's Command. And it was a card that was completely main boardable, did a lot of really cool stuff. I'm not going to say all the cards on the words on that card because it's just dumb. But it gets to do 2 things, and one of the things that it can do is just make a player sacrifice an enchantment. And that came in while Theros was still in standard. No, I'm not sure if Theros was ever... Theros was still in standard with that. And Theros was a totally artifact-themed set, enchantment-themed set. And there was just this random card that was super good that made you sacrifice enchantments and just say, I don't like you, enchantments. So I definitely agree with Gino that it is cool when they make... I like safety valves, but I think they should be sideboard cards, not main board cards. And it's kind of uncool when you just get splash hate, because this really good card just messes up your deck really easily.
Yeah, and one thing that with safety valves is safety valves before, like the graveyard safety valves they printed were colorless and could therefore be played by any deck. And you could just hate out a graveyard strategy regardless of what you're playing. Whereas some of the cards we've mentioned are color specific, like a blue counterspell or a white sorcery, and those are the answers. So some decks won't have the ability to have a powerful answer. And, you know, that'll obviously, if those kind of decks become powerful, like a artifact-driven engine deck becomes super powerful, that will automatically skew which decks people play. So maybe the colors that don't have an answer just get, you know, chased out of the metagame because they can't answer this very powerful thing. But that's a little bit more forgiving than having a safety valve where every deck just goes, okay, this is getting oppressive, let's shut this shit down. Party's over, everyone go home, we're turning the lights on.
Fun police.
A long time ago in Magic, they used to print really fun cards that were like red 2, just destroy all islands. That was a really fun safety valve, just in case, you know, the blue got too strong. I definitely would agree that the safety valves they print now are a lot more fun and interesting rather than just completely annihilate what your opponent is doing.
Yeah. Like, for a while, it started with, like, red to destroy all planes.
Yeah.
Or destroy all islands. Boil, and I forget what the white version was. Like, they printed cards that, like, each color has 2 enemy colors, and so the hate was, like, on the enemy colors, but the hate was just the harshest shit. Like, there was a green hate card that's, like, 3 mana, and islands don't untap, so they're basically useless. Then they went to, like, making hate cards that just were super efficient, but only hit things that are in a certain color. Like, hey, deal 4 damage, like, destroy target creature, white or green creature for 1 black mana, so it's just super efficient. And they've dialed it back to where, like, hey, you can kind of deal with one thing really efficiently, but it's more narrow than, like, an entire fifth of the card set, or, like, 2/5 of all cards. And I think that's just, it makes for more interesting choices, and it makes your deck construction more important when you have to actually make a decision about which cards you're bringing in your sideboard, and they don't just, you know, I drew my card, I win. My card that just turns off your entire deck. I just find that it makes for more interesting gameplay when you can actually play a game, and then occasionally, you know, there's a card that makes you a little bit more likely to win, but, like, there's cards like Thoughtseize that just they're super efficient, and they happen to also rip apart combo decks.
I'm going to have to defend Thoughtseize. I really love Thoughtseize as a card, and I think that the reason Thoughtseize was so problematic in the last Standard, and it definitely was the last time it was in Standard,
it's been problematic every time it's been in Standard, just for the record.
I think both times it was in Standard, the first time we had it with Fairies, which I don't think that's really a fair test, and we also had Mono Black Devotion, which is also just not a fair deck in its Standard. So I don't know if we've ever had, like, a fair Standard with Thoughtseize. I don't know if it's really fair to say that Thoughtseize is the problem. That's an argument for another day.
It's one of the most powerful discard spells ever printed, but those are the kind of cards where, or like Mana Leak. There's another one. It's 2 mana, answer any problem in the first 5 turns, basically. That's pretty damn strong, and it's skewed Standard every time it's been in play. Whereas this time they printed a card, Revolutionary Rebuff, I think is the name of it, which is almost Mana Leak, but it's a little bit weak. It's a little bit weaker.
A lot weaker.
Straight up.
It says non-artifact for 2?
It's 2 mana instead of 3, the cost. So Mana Leak is 2 mana, counter target spell unless its controller pays 3 mana. Revolutionary Rebuff is same cost, but counter target spell unless it's counter target non-artifact spell unless its controller pays 2 mana, which is not obviously straight up just not as good, but also, hey, it doesn't counter artifacts. So if you want to play that weird, you know, build around game, you can. So I like the narrowing of the answers, and also I wish that they also narrowed down some of the power of the threats. Also, I think some of the threats are a bit too broad and powerful.
Are you talking about, like, Gearhulks maybe as threats?
The green one.
Just the green one. Yeah.
Just the green one.
I'm gonna disagree with you a little bit and say to me I like the powerful threats and I like the powerful answers. I wish we'd see the same power of threats and just make the answers a little better than they are now. Not as powerful as like they are in modern. For example, I thought a card that was really cool, that was a really cool counterspell, was Ojutai's Command, which saw some play. Ojutai's Command could counter a creature spell, but it also like draw a card and it gave you some life. I think it was one of those cards where you can pick two of the modes, and it's awesome play. I think that's kind of where I want counterspells to land. Be like maybe a little expensive, like 3 or 4 mana, and have like a really nice upside, or a card kind of like Syncopate, or I can't remember what the one is now that's in standard, but it's like Blue X. Yeah, Battle of Wits.
It's not Battle of Wits. It's Clash of Wills.
Clash of Wills. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, I really like. I feel like that's kind of where counterspells should land, rather than or like I think Essence Scatter, which is blue 1 counter target creature spell, and Negate, which is blue 1 counter target non-creature spell. I think those are the kind of counter spells, and stuff like Dissolve, I believe it was, which was blue 1 counter target spell scry 1. I really like that card, and that's the kind of counter spell I want to see personally. I think Revolutionary Rebuff is probably fine. I hope it sees play.
I think it's. I mean, it almost had. People will play a counterspell that hits almost everything.
Yeah,
for 2 mana. They will. It doesn't really matter how. It can be pretty gimped, and it still will see play. But I just like that there's this interplay here, without just throwing bigger and badder things. And yeah, that Green Gear Hulk, I have a feeling is going to be around for a while. I'm probably not going to enjoy playing against that. But
I think all the Gear Hulks, besides the only one I'm kind of nervous about is the red one. I think the red one might not be good enough. Maybe there will be some really sick ramp deck that just the top 3 cards are just going to murder your face. But I think in a normal red deck that's kind of aggressive and low to the ground, the red Gear Hulk just really doesn't have a place at all.
Yeah.
But maybe the new Chandra will spawn a mid-rangey red deck, so we'll see.
Why don't we wrap this up by just talking about? Why don't you give 1 or 2 cards that really interest you from this set and that you're excited to build around, and why? So why don't you go first, Billy?
Yeah. So personally, I really like playing. This kind of sounds weird, but like I really like playing multicolored decks that have lots of synergy within itself. So that seems kind of like, oh well, obviously, right? Everyone does, but for me,
that's most Magic decks.
Yeah, but when I started playing the most was in Return to Ravnica, where it was literally like you pick 2 colors and they have like a mechanic that only those 2 colors do, and so that's where a lot of my love, or that's where I'm like looking through that lens of deck building when I put a deck together, and so one card that stands out to me is Depala, Pilot Exemplar, who's a 3 mana creature in red and white that says all other dwarves get +1/+1. And also, all your vehicles get +1/+1 as long as they are a creature. And then like another book of text, I'm not going to go, super crazy into that, but she can help you get more dwarves and more vehicles. So that card seems like maybe it's not going to be great, but it's going to be a lot of fun if you can make a Depala deck turn on. And the other the other card that kind of excited me actually was one that I played with in the pre-release, was called Restoration Gearsmith. And she's a 4 mana, also a 3/3, and when she enters the battlefield, you can pull a creature or an artifact from your graveyard back to your hand. So, if something you had earlier, before turn 4 when you play her got you some good value and then died, you can get that value again. So for example, I played the Puzzle Knot, the black Puzzle Knot, and when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card and lose a life. And sometimes, if she came up on turn 6 or 7, and I was kind of running out of steam, I could just grab that Puzzle Knot again and draw 2 cards off of it, to sort of get some, wind in my sails again. That was just one thing that really helped me in my pre-release, and that was really fun. So having a white-black option to get stuff back from your graveyard so you can play it again seems cool, and having a red-white get more dwarves, get more vehicles, do fun stuff with dwarves and vehicles card seems really cool.
Yeah, she is the oh dang it.
What, Gearsmith or Depala?
DePaula, she is the Vin Diesel of this Fast and Furious crew. She puts up the signal, and then everyone's driving cars.
Wait, that's DePaula, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, DePaula's the Vin Diesel. Yeah, she throws up the sign, and then all the dwarves just hop in their hot rods, and they're all just stronger.
Then you play Start Your Engines, which is the real card that exists. You run them over.
Half of the vehicles are just like race cars.
Yes.
Sweet.
My 2 cards that I'm really excited to build around are Noxious Gearhulk as the first one. I really, really enjoyed Green-Black Delirium. I actually play Magic Duels, which is probably not the best program, but it's the best program that I currently have access to right now to play Magic. And I also have a Green-Black Delirium type deck in that format, but I also just really love the Green-Black Delirium deck in current standard. And I just really like that Noxious Gearhulk is a creature that will come in, kill something really hard, and then be a 5/4 menace, and then also be an artifact and a creature if you manage to get it in your graveyard. It's just really nice for Delirium. And then another one of my favorite cards from Magic, period, is Solemn Simulacrum. I might not be pronouncing that right. Simulacrum. Yeah, that card's weird pronunciation-wise. And there is a reasonable version of that card for 3 mana called Filigree Familiar. And
little fox.
Yeah, little fox robot friend. And I'm just really excited about paying 3 mana and getting a 2/2 and then 2 life. And then when it dies, I draw a card. It replaces itself.
It's like just really value pet.
Yeah, I'm just really excited about my value pet.
It's value Tamagotchi pet.
I picked 2 cards that have enter the battlefield triggers, so you can kind of tell that I'm just all about value.
Yeah, except when it instead of pooping itself, it dies and then gives you cards. It's a very cool little buddy. Yeah, my 2 cards are definitely Aetherworks Marvel, which is by far my favorite card in the set. It is an energy user. It's got 2 abilities. One, whenever a permanent you control is put into your graveyard, or you control is put into your graveyard, you get an energy, and then you can pay 6 energy and tap it to look at the top 6 cards of your library, and then you can cast a card from among them without paying its mana cost, and then put the rest on your the bottom of your library in a random order, which makes you basically get to cheat on mana. Hey, Billy, It lets you take energy, this thing that isn't mana, and it lets you pay it so that you can play things that cost mana for free without paying mana.
Yeah, that's just basically everything you want, Gino.
It's basically everything I want. And I'm super excited because in testing, I've been able to pretty routinely cheat out 13 mana and 10 mana cards on turn 4 or 5 without paying anything and still being able to play regular Magic for the most part. Whereas a lot of the decks that kind of do that try to ramp into that kind of stuff.
Now,
one, they need to play cards that cost 7 mana instead of just going straight to 10, which is soft. Come on, what are you doing? And then 2, while you're, working your way up to that kind of mana, you're leaving yourself super vulnerable to removal and to different blowouts versus this kind of strategy where you're playing kind of regular Magic, even though you're playing semi-bad cards that just make energy. But when you've got the Marvel, you get to just cheat out these gigantic monsters.
So, I guess I have. Did you say the 2 cards, Gino, that you wanted to see?
So the thing no, I haven't. Oh, well, the 2 things I'm cheating out are Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, and Emrakul, the Infinite Gyre. No, not Emrakul.
You're a fun player who likes to play fun cards.
Importantly, the Aetherworks Marvel lets you cast those cards, so you do get their sick cast triggers.
Yes, you eat 2 of their permanents, or you take control of them for a turn, and you have a 13/13 flying, trampling, protection from instants. It's a pretty fucked up thing to do. Basically, every time I've used the Marvel and hit any of those cards, the game just almost immediately ends. And then if I don't hit one of those cards, I don't die, which is kind of fucked up also, because I should lose if I've put this much effort into getting this engine going, and I don't hit. And then the other card I want to build around is Aether Flux Reservoir, which is a card that whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn, and then it has an ability, pay 50 life, Aether Flux Reservoir deals 50 damage to target creature or player. Now, this should be a bad card.
I
should be a bad card.
I actually got 42 life in one of my previous games.
Now, that's something that can happen in Limited, but that first ability is basically Storm, which is one of the most broken mechanics ever printed in Magic. And so what Storm was every Storm spell had this ability that
we're describing Storm.
When you cast it, you get a copy of this spell for every spell you cast this turn. And that meant that, like, whatever the innocuous card was, if you played, like, 5 cards before you cast that Storm card, it generally, like, won you the game. It would do something disgusting. Like, and ways you would do that would be, like, playing cards that draw you cards, or playing cards that are for free, or cheating spells. So it just kind of rewards you for playing cards and doing nothing until they're dead. You're just kind of doing mana-neutral stuff until your opponent is dead. And they've basically not printed anything with Storm in a very long time because Storm's fucked up. And this card is 4 mana, and it basically says if you can cast 8 cards this turn or 9 cards in a turn, you win. Which, that's a dangerous thing. It's very dangerous.
We talked earlier about mechanics that we'd like to see return. Mark Rosewater, the head designer in Magic, actually rates all mechanics on a scale called the Storm scale. And basically the concept of the scale is that Storm is never returning ever, except, on this card. So I thought that was funny.
Yeah, I would say that when there's a scale that says this ability is way too fucked up, making this artifact that is very close to Storm, it really plays well with Storm. I'm guessing that there's going to be something broken about that card. So I want to make the broken.
You can really tell what kind of players Billy, myself, and Gino are. That Gino picked 2 cards that look kind of wonky and weird on their surface, but are trying to do primarily broken, messed up stuff to people. I picked 2 cards that just want to enter the battlefield and 2 for 1 my opponent, and then Billy picked just some multicolor cards that are kind of cool.
Yes, there are 3 archetypes that are said to describe Magic players: Timmy, Johnny, and Spike. I would say, Billy, you just want cool things to happen. You just want to be around while cool things are happening.
Yeah, I'm really that other one that kind of doesn't count, but I'm really Vorthos. That's what I really am, but that doesn't count.
Yeah, you like lore, but mostly you like doing fun stuff. So you're kind of a Timmy. I
don't know, but Billy recently in his Magic Duels games plays a deck that's just all about killing everything. I don't know if maybe there's some Spike in him yet.
Only when I play Magic Duels, which is a Steam version of Magic, am I Spike, and I'm 100% Spike in Magic Duels.
Yep, there is Johnny, who likes to do cool things and be expressive and creative, and that is me. And Devin just wants to win. Devin just wants to play the good cards that make him win.
No. Devin likes to outplay and gain advantage. That's what he likes to do. And it just so happens that doing those things also makes you win.
Yes.
I really do like when I get to play a card that's my card deals with just 2 of your cards. I really like when my cards do that. They just say 2 of your cards for 1 of my cards. I just want to always do that, just 100 times.
Which I think also explains why you were I just wish the answers were more powerful and that the cards were more powerful.
Devin also just wants to raise the roof on power level.
Everything more power. Just turn up everything to 11. I don't want anything to go down. I just want everything to go up.
Just what if the power and toughness of just every creature just went up by 1? Is that what you mean, Devin?
No.
I want the ones that I have to go up, but then the opponents do not.
Yeah, it seems pretty reasonable.
And then my answer to that was I want these cards to be weird and narrow and niche, and I want it to be an intellectual puzzle where if you figure it out correctly, you have a real advantage, but you don't just get to bludgeon people to death with your amazing cards.
Amazing cards!
That is spoken like someone who did not have enough money to afford a good deck until he was in his 20s. But I think that's probably it for Kaladesh.
I have one more question. It's not going to be a
Okay.
really hard question unless you guys make it a fucking hard question. But we do have one more set of this coming out, or like because each time they release a new like world, there's 2 blocks right now. There's like the first piece is like part 1 and part 2. So when part 2 of Kaladesh comes out, what are you hoping they add to it?
I'm gonna go first, and I'm hoping they'll add Thopters. Where are the Thopters? I wanted more of them. And I love all the Thopter cards in the Magic Origins. I just loved Whirler Rogue, and I loved P and Kieran Nalar, and I just want to play some little 1/1s that fly. And I didn't get to do very much of that in Kaladesh, so I was very sad.
I'll go next, and a card that I would really love to see printed says, take all this energy. It's probably going to cost red X, and it says, pay X in energy counters and deal that much damage to target, creature or player, because I just want to have a Spirit Bomb from Dragon Ball Z. I just want you to collect all the energy and then say, like, I'm going to win this game because, I'm on the ropes right now, but I've got 12 energy that I haven't been able to use. I'm just going to top deck a Spirit Bomb, and that's what I'm going to kill you with this game.
Yeah, they already printed Harness Lightning, which adds 3 energy, and then you can pay or any amount of energy to deal damage to a creature. I don't think they're going to print one that goes to a face.
I want to win via Spirit Bomb. All right,
that's fair. Your Spirit Bomb could be the reservoir. You're storing up all this life, and then you're beating someone to death with it. That's pretty good. I want some more energy producers, some better energy producers in red, green, and blue. I think there are some great ones right now, but some of the slots in my testing for Aetherworks Marvel just had some problems. They're not the best cards, and so just having different options I think would be nice. And one thing I definitely just don't want to see is a 4-mana or 5-mana destroy all artifacts, or like some 2-3 mana exile target graveyard. Like, I don't want there to be just this one powerful, hateful answer, because I think that the decks as they are constructed now, they don't have a clean, neat answer, but none of them are so powerful that they need one. So I would like it to stay in that level of balance where there's a lot of viable options, but none of them are so dominant that it's a miserable time. Actually, one thing I also want to see is something that just fucking kills Spell Queller. I just want that card to die somehow.
I just want the card to live. I just love everything about Spell Queller.
I hate everything about it. I hate this stupid 3-mana. It's a 2/3, and it gets rid of your spell. Like, I know that it's not broken. It
specifically quells your spell? It doesn't get rid of it?
It quells the shit out of it, and all of the cards I want to build around are 4 mana, and it is a 3-mana card that just basically says, fuck 4-mana cards.
It says no, like all blue cards should.
So I want that card to somehow become either hated out of the metagame, which won't happen because it's one of the best cards in it, and or just like a reasonable answer that is very cheap. Something.
1 mana destroy target spirit.
Yeah, 1 mana destroy target spirit, 1 mana counter target spell with flash, something. 0 mana counter target spell with flash. That's what I want, but I know that's not going to happen. So, thank you. Thank you, Devin.
Thank you. It was great to be here. I think this is my 3rd podcast now, and I can't wait to be on more.
Great. Thank you, Billy.
Thank you, Gino. Thank you, Devin. I honestly am like the least equipped to talk about Magic, but it was still a lot of fun. So I look forward to maybe hearing some feedback from the viewers. If we want to do more of this, I might actually have to learn something about this wild and crazy game we call Magic the Gathering.
And thank you, listeners. Once again, give us some feedback. Like, this was a rough draft. This was a rough draft of talking about Magic on this podcast. So I'm sure there are segments you did not like. Maybe there were even segments you liked. So if you could tell us which those were, and if the did not like is the entire podcast, let us know, because then we just won't do this again. But the absence of your voice says to me that there was some amount of success. So go ahead, at Deep Listens Pod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. Just leave a comment on the podcast, or deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. So just send your feedback in, and we'll know whether to have this again, or if we need to get, some more expert-y people. Like I have some people I can tap that know a bit more about this game. So thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, Devin. Thank you, Billy. Till next time. Peace.